All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'll take that. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Schnoll. I'm a senior program manager on the Office 365 Trust team, where, among other things, I work in the space of regulatory compliance in our cloud services. So if you've seen anything related to the Service Trust portal, or even better, if you've seen our Compliance Manager application, that's the stuff that I'm working on. But today, I'm super thrilled to be here talking to you once again at our premier event on Exchange tips and tricks. But we're going to extend this a little bit more and include some Office 365 tips and tricks, because it's not just Exchange anymore, is it? It's also Yammer and SharePoint and everything else. So there's going to be a few extra things in there. But for you die-hard Exchange fans, especially for those of you who've been coming to this session year after year after year, there's going to be a lot of good Exchange stuff in there, especially for you on-premises folks, which I know is still important to you. Quick show of hands, how many of you are running Exchange 2016? All right. 2013? 2010. All right. Anybody still on 2007? Okay, good. Anybody in Exchange Online? All right. Well, that's almost everyone, so great. Okay. How many of you have been to one of these sessions before? Oh, awesome. How many of you were in the session last year? Okay, I want to let you know this is not going to be a tape mishap like we had in 2017. I haven't hidden anything around the room, but I do have stuff to give out. And we're going to do it differently this year so that people don't think they're going to get something and end up with nothing. So bear with me as we try to get through that later on this session. For those of you who've seen these kinds of things before, which seems to be most of you, you know we always start out slow and we kind of work our way up, and then we kind of meander all over the place. If you haven't seen one of these before, we kind of start out slow and then we work our way up, and then we kind of meander all over the place. And so what I try to do is I try to put something in there for everybody, but that's not always possible. But based on what I saw with the hands in the room, I think there's going to be something for everyone in there. And as I said, if there's not, I have some cool stuff to give away anyway. All right. Now, how many of you were in the Exchange 2019 session? All right, that's great. How many of you are looking forward to running Exchange 2019 as soon as it comes out? Awesome. That's awesome. Keep that up. But what's important to note is that we have changed now the way in which we build Exchange. Historically, we used to build them all together as one code base. We don't do that anymore. We forked them. Now they're separate code bases. There's a lot of reasons that we've done that, too. The biggest reason is that when we had a single code base, we ended up shipping a lot of stuff to on-prem customers that you just didn't need. And we had to spend a lot of time going through code for Exchange Online and making sure it wasn't causing regressions and bugs inside of Exchange on-premises as well. So that was kind of a disadvantage. It initially was a great idea because we had one single code base to work from, but eventually it didn't work out so well because we spent an awful lot of time doing validation and looking for things, bugs that need to be fixed in order to get the code ready to ship in a stable way on-prem. So now what we do, got a different build process altogether. We have actually forked the code so that we now have two separate code bases, one for Exchange Online and one for Exchange Server on-premises. And we're going to continue maintaining it out of that fork branch as well. So eventually when cumulative updates come out, we'll still be putting those through the same branch. Now, I know a lot of you had your hands up when I talked about who was in the Exchange 2019 session, so I'm not going to go too deep into 2019. I do want to cover kind of the highlight reel, if you will, though. For instance, we've announced that it's releasing this year. Don't ask me the date, I can't tell you, but we did say it's coming out this year. Okay, here's the date. No, I can't tell you. The release manager is sitting right there. I can't tell you. But it's coming out very soon. It's imminent. We've also introduced something called the Metacache database. We put that in there because as we've been talking years and years about Exchange, and in particular its I/O use, we've already talked about the fact that even with 2016 and to a certain extent 2013, we were starting to reach the limits of the laws of physics in terms of how quickly we could get data off those spinning platters. So we've created a new cache in 2019, and the cache is going to keep the most important, the hot data that is most frequently accessed inside the database, and put it onto tiered storage, tiered being SSD flash storage for the Metacache database, and normal platter storage like you're using today, hopefully for the databases and whatnot. We're also supporting server core. This is a huge deal. This is a really huge deal. It took us more than 2 years to get to the point where we could support this. And in fact, we've already been running more than 250,000 servers in Exchange Online on server core in this new code. We removed unified messaging. We know that a lot of our customers were simply no longer using it, so that's gone. But don't worry, we've got lots of options for you to move forward with the stack. And we're requiring Windows Server 2019 as well. There's going to be no getting around that. That's going to have to be the operating system you use if you want to install Exchange 2019. You can choose the desktop experience if you choose, but really Server Core is going to give you the best experience and the best performance as well. So we strongly prefer, although we don't require, using Server Core instead of the desktop experience. The calculator for Exchange, so you can size things, that's in the process of being updated for, among other things, taking into account use of the Metacache database. We do have ratio and other information that you can use today along with the 2016 calendar in order to properly size your environments, and that is in fact what we recommend that you do. And then we also do have some new guidance with for Server Core, and it does include you adding the desktop experience on there as a kind of a worst case performance scenario. But again, we generally don't recommend that you do that. You don't really need fax services or Windows Media Player or even a web browser on your Exchange servers. Just let it be dedicated to Exchange. The other thing to keep in mind is we're not going to release a separate hybrid key for 2019 as well. Okay, so what that means is you can either use a 2016 hybrid server, something that's simply licensed only for hybrid server, or you can use a fully licensed 2019 server. We just don't see the need to have a separate licensed key for an individual 2019 server. So those are kind of the big changes that are coming down the pipe. And again, if you haven't seen both the Welcome to Exchange 2019 session and the separate session we had on the Metacache database, I would strongly recommend viewing those recordings after the show's over. All right, and of course, Exchange, particularly for those of you on premises, when you put any version in, it's going to modify permanently your Active Directory. It's going to make changes to the schema of that. The last schema updates we actually introduced were way back in Exchange 2016, CU7. We're on CU10 now. 10, 9, and 8 didn't have any schema changes, but as you probably know, they're cumulative, so even if you skip a CU, if we add them later, or if you miss a CU for whatever reason, if they're in there later, we'll go ahead and do all the schema changes that you need to bring you up to date. We also document every single change that we make. So you can go and see all the attributes, all the object IDs, all the MAPI IDs, all the index properties, everything that we're going to change as we make schema changes to your directory. All right, those are the basics. Now, I talked about the kind of meandering around bit. The way this works is I get a lot of requests. Sometimes they come in through email, sometimes LinkedIn, sometimes Twitter. Sometimes I'm looking at DLs. Sometimes I'm looking at Yammer groups inside of Microsoft. Sometimes I'm working with support people, including beta support engineers. And I'm trying to take the pulse on what's going out there in the Exchange ecosystem. And I try to find what are people struggling with, or what don't they know? What haven't we told them yet that we want them to really know? Okay, so that's the part that we're getting into now. Some of this stuff, I hope you know. If you do, that's great. Because from our perspective, it looks like things that customers are struggling with, things we're not communicating well on, or things that are just challenges for you in your environments. Like mailbox auto reply in time zones. Now, this one's probably more on us than anything else, and that's because the problem here is that there's a start time and end time with both of these parameters, but the get commandlets and the set commandlet that are used to manipulate or view them give you the time zones in different values. Okay, so the problem is when you use set, it's actually using the GMT for the time zone. And in fact, all Exchange Online servers use GMT. When you do it with the get commandlet, the start time and end time are actually calculated based on the local time of the local computer. So what that means is you actually have to do some calculation. If you want something in EDT, That's GMT minus 4, so you have to actually add 4 hours. So if I wanted something to start at 1600, to start and stop at 1600, I actually have to change the times to 2200. You would not believe the number of support tickets we would get on things like this, and rightly so, because it's very confusing. Message latency and tracking logs. Another common ask is, how do we calculate this? Well, actually, each component calculates its own by itself. Each component is instrumented to do that, and it will provide values into the tracking log, and the logs simply show up the rounded value of that. And if you look at the message info section of the logs, that's where you'll see the component names. But how do you decipher them? Well, lucky for you, I put a complete list of them in the notes section of this slide. So you're going to want to head and download this slide because it's got a ton of extra information in there for you, including a list of all the components that can be in the message tracking logs. And I'll point out, you're not going to find this list anywhere else. We don't have it documented publicly anywhere else. This is the only place you're going to find it. All right. How many of you are still running antivirus software on your Exchange servers? Don't be shy. It's still a good idea. Okay. It can help increase security. But remember, you need to keep that Windows stuff away from Exchange, especially the Exchange databases and logs, or you can run into problems where they're fighting for contention for those files. Now, in Windows Server, we had Windows Defender that was the full version of the same antivirus engines that we had in System Center Endpoint Protection. And we have a way where you can programmatically create exclusions for Windows Defender right now. So if you don't have any exclusions set and you're running Windows Defender on your Exchange server databases and log files may be at risk. You want to programmatically add those exclusions so that we don't touch any of the files that Exchange is working with. If you do, you're probably going to get stuck in a support call wondering why your database isn't responsive and why you can't open mailboxes. So please be aware of that. Another thing that we find customers are doing is that they're also doing things that they're supposed to with the managed availability health mailboxes. Now, the MA health mailboxes are not new, and there's a lot of documentation on what you should and should not do with them, but customers maybe aren't finding that documentation or just aren't following the best practices. The health mailboxes are there for the managed availability functions themselves, for them to send message probes and find out message latency and delivery times and uptimes and whatnot. If you mess with the mailboxes or the accounts they're under, you could break this, and you don't want managed availability to break because it's keeping your servers running when things go wrong. So one of the most important things is don't do any customized password policies. Okay? These mailboxes will automatically reset their own passwords frequently. In fact, you should expect password reset happening frequently because that will happen when the mailbox becomes instantiated and can often become reinstantiated after a failover occurs. You also want to exclude them from user account lockout policies. You don't want to move them from the monitoring container in Active Directory. You don't want to apply mailbox quotas to it. You don't want to change AD permissions. You don't want to move them between databases. You don't want to change user properties like password settings. And if you are applying a policy, make sure that it's retained a minimum of 30 days. All the info in that mailbox is retained for at least 30 days so that managed availability has a historical record to go back and look at. Now, the other thing that we've seen is that there is a bug that's come up where the health mailboxes are not being properly removed when you remove a mailbox database. Okay, so the health mailbox is tied to each database. We spin one up for every database that you have on your server. But there is a bug right now that recently came up where if you do delete one of the databases, it's not deleting the health mailbox, and you end up with that error message. It's the same error message if you try to do it in the GUI. I'm just showing it in the shell here. And so the workaround for that is actually documented in the notes section. I'm not going to get into the fix part of the break, but I do want you to be aware of this because it is relatively new, and it is something we have documented, but I want to maintain a lot of awareness around it. Another thing that's commonly asked is, how can we safely decommission on-premises servers after we've migrated everyone to the cloud? How many of you are planning to completely migrate to the cloud eventually and decommission on-prem? How many of you are planning on staying in hybrid for an extended period? And how many of you are staying on premises forever? All right. Those numbers were very different last year and the year before. So there's three scenarios where you can safely remove Exchange servers after you've migrated everything to the cloud. The first scenario is you've done the short, quick cutover migration. Okay, you don't need directory synchronization after that, so you can go ahead and decommission your on-premises servers, get rid of DirSync, and you're done. A stage migration where you don't need DirSync anymore, that's another reason you can decommission them. And then hybrid, once the hybrid configuration has been removed, and then you don't need DirSync anymore. All of those scenarios, if all of those scenarios are true for you, you can go ahead and execute the decommission process for your on-prem servers. How do you do that? Well, it's not just simply uninstalling Exchange. Okay, you could try doing that, but there's a few things you're going to want to clean up before you do that. For instance, public folders and moving MX and other DNS records over, changing client access server endpoints, deleting the connectors that were created with the hybrid configuration wizard, removing the org relationship that's created between the two entities. And then if you are using OAuth for your hybrid deployment, there's a couple extra commands that you need to do to disable it both on your servers and to disable it on the cloud side of things as well. And then just a couple more steps, disable directory sync, and then once that's done, you can go ahead and do the normal orderly uninstall of Exchange Server. And make sure you actually go into Control Panel and do that normal uninstall process. That is still the only supported way to do that. Okay, a lot of customers think I can just delete the objects from Active Directory, shut down the server, and it's good. No, you actually have to go through the complete uninstall process. Let us try and clean up as much as we can. Do that one server at a time, and the last server you decommission will end up taking your org object out of AD, and you'll be done. All right, mailbox auditing updates. We're making some changes. We're actually going to enable auditing for all tenants in Office 365 Exchange Online moving forward. That is rolling out now. So as you spin up a tenant, we're going to be, thank you, yeah, that's a good thing. We think so too. We didn't do it before because it's a lot of overhead and not every customer thinks they need it, but the reality is you really want that audit trail on, and we think it's a good idea, so we're defaulting it on for all new tenants. Now, of course, admins, as with everything we default on, you have the ability to turn it off if you want to. We, again, think you shouldn't. I'd like to see you keep that on because if you have any sort of incident, whether it's a security incident or a performance incident or whatever, you can't go back and do any forensic analysis without those audit logs. You can't turn on auditing after something happens because it won't capture anything. The incident's already happened. So I have auditing turned on. Now, you can also, if you have any kind of privacy or other concerns, or if you just want to focus your efforts, you can also determine which users will have auditing enabled. You can turn it on and off for the whole org, or you can choose specific users. We also included, we expanded the default set of audit events that we include in there so that all of the owner and all of the delegate events should now appear in your mailbox audit logs. We didn't have everything in there if someone was just viewing things that might not have been logged. If things were copied, sometimes that might not have been logged. But now all of that is in there, and every user or system activity that happens inside the mailbox will show up in the audit log. DMARC, how many of you are using DMARC? All right, not as many hands as I'd hope. We did recently roll out some new rules, and these new rules are going to more aggressively enforce the DMARC quarantine, and they're going to enforce the reject policies that you as the tenant admin has set up. And in fact, you may already be seeing some messages affected by this as it's been rolling out for about a month and a half now. Now, if you're finding that legitimate messages are being rejected because of the sender domain DMARC rule, you could go ahead and follow one of these guidance. If you're the tenant admin, you can do that. If it's happening at the user level, they can go ahead and follow the guidance for users. Or if they're just a regular administrator for Exchange, they can do a transport rule and fix the problem that way. All right, another change that's coming quickly is we have recently discontinued support for connected accounts in Outlook on the web. Connected account would be like a third-party account or some other mail account where you want the mail to come in your Outlook web app account. Effective as of October 30th, which is just a month and a couple days from now, all connected accounts that you have in there will stop syncing mail. And then a couple weeks after that, we're removing the option completely, and in fact, the warning that you're seeing at the bottom is what we're displaying today. But a couple weeks after that, we're removing the option completely to remove those, to add those accounts. The UI simply will not exist. But you do have some options. Okay, you've got a couple options. You could use Outlook for Mac or Windows. You could use the Mail app in Windows 10. You could forward email from those accounts to Outlook on the web if you still wanted to use Outlook on the web for connected accounts. Or you can use Outlook Mobile, Outlook for iOS or Outlook Android. So really, it's just the connected account experience in Outlook in the web that's going away, not connected account usage itself. All right, another thing that is changing, document fingerprints. We're actually removing your ability to use document fingerprints inside the Exchange Admin Center. So you'll have to revert to PowerShell to do that. If you try to add them now, the way we've implemented can be a little bit confusing because you actually will let you get all the way through the wizard and actually upload things and get ready to save it. And then when you click save, that's when you get that error message, unfortunately. So this way you'll know that ahead of time, and maybe you won't go down the path of having to find out the bad news the hard way. This is going to be a permanent change. We're not going to be bringing it back to either the EAC or any of the new admin portals that may come in the future. So document fingerprinting, just be aware, is something that you'll be managing through PowerShell from now on. Now, there's also resources for managing change. We've talked a lot about it, a lot of change that's coming. How can you manage this change in the cloud? For Office 365 services, the updates really just run in the background, and they appear in your tenant as they're available by default behavior. You do have the ability to change that behavior. If you want to delay getting the new updates, you can do that. But generally, eventually, they're going to make their way to your tenant. We do provide a roadmap. It's not always 100% complete. We can't put every single thing that's coming in the pipeline on the roadmap, but we try to make the roadmap as wide and as inclusive as possible to make sure that any change that's coming down the line that might affect you in any way, you could get notice of ahead of time. The other thing is, how many of you are using the Message Center? Because that's another challenge I see, is not all tenant admins are fully leveraging the Message Center. We would like to see you do that because that really is the best way for us to communicate with you. You know, we do give you places, for example, to put a technical contact information. We now recently added a place for you to put a global privacy contact in there. But when we contact you, it's going to be through the Message Center. That's the best way to let you know that something is up with your tenant, or something's going to change, or something terrible has happened. We're looking at using the Message Center for things like HIPAA or GDPR breach notification and so forth. So you want to get used to being in there and getting those notices, because that will be the primary way we can communicate with you. Of course, there will be a waterfall effect. If we can't get a hold of you that way, we really need to contact you, we'll start reaching out to a global privacy contact or a technical contact or a tenant admin and so forth. Now, change is any major update that is communicated with at least 30 days in advance. That's what goes on the roadmap. We're not just going to throw something on there. When we say something is rolling out now, that means we gave 30 days notice, we started the rollout process, and it's moving around for worldwide distribution. Changes could be anything. They could be changes in Exchange Online. They could be changes in SharePoint. It could be changes to our branding, changes to URLs that are meaningful endpoints, changes that affect your ability to connect to the service, like changes around TLS and the deprecation of 1.0 and 1.2 that will happen shortly. All those changes are broadcast on the roadmap, and you have the ability to choose where you want those changes to be. So the way things start, though, is all the changes that we do, we get to experience first inside of Microsoft. That's Ring 1. That's the feature teams. In fact, some of the people in this room are on feature teams that build features, they deploy it in their own ring, and they get to experience those features firsthand. Once they're satisfied with those features, they'll push them to Ring 2. Ring 2 is where we have everybody on the Office 365 team get involved. It's largely an optional thing, but a lot of those updates do end up getting foisted on us, so we are kind of forced into doing it, which is a good thing because we do want to eat our own dog food before you get it. Then main thing, we expand all the way out to Microsoft. So now all of Microsoft has the ability to check these changes. And in fact, our first customer in Office 365 is always the Microsoft.com tenant. So we're always the first tenant to get all that stuff. Then we'll move to targeted release, and then after that, we'll go to worldwide release. So from your perspective, your choices are either a targeted release, you'll get them first, right after we validated them in our own environment, or if you prefer a little bit more validation, let others take the first step, go for the worldwide release and get them when they're ready for general availability at the end of the rollout. Speaking of some more changes, there's some changes coming around the EOP addresses that we're publishing. You can use that URL, the vanity URL, to get to it. We're actually trying to consolidate our ranges down now. They're quite large now, but what we'd like to hope to do is maybe get down to the 4 to 6 different ranges that we can publish and just keep it at that. We are also... Oh, you like that? Thank you. We are also deprecating the feeds that we had, the RSS feeds, the XML feeds. They'll still be there for about another month and a half or so, and then they're going to be replaced with a REST API. So when you go to either of those pages, you'll see that information right away with a link on how to get to that REST API so you can continue consuming those changes and being on top of that. We're also looking at other places where we can introduce REST APIs for you to keep tabs on changes such as that, and be more informed in real time as to when they're actually happening. Another change that's coming, and this is a real minor one, but I thought it was interesting enough to share. What we've done is we just changed the property for the set OA mailbox commandlet, and it's the property that controls whether or not your Outlook on the web users can use some form of third-party file attachment, so like Box or Dropbox or Ignite storage, one of those. We used to have third-party attachments enabled. That was the parameter. We recently changed that, and by recently, I mean literally like 3 weeks ago. We changed that to third-party file providers enabled instead. So be aware of that. If you are using any of those services and you want your users to use those services through Outlook on the web, you would need to change that to using the new parameter. One thing to keep in mind, though, I mentioned this change is very recent. It's so recent, it is still rolling out to everyone. So if you actually go and look for this commandlet, you might get an error in your tenant saying that parameter doesn't exist yet. Be patient. It will show up. It's rolling out right now. Now, another common question we get is, where do I point my MX records? Do they have to point to Exchange Online? And the answer might surprise you. No, not necessarily, depending on what your situation is, but there are a couple configurations where things could break. Okay, you need to know what the limitations are. For the most effective protection against spam, pointing your MX record to Exchange Online is the way to go. That will give you the best protection, the best message hygiene, the cleanest mail, the best experience. If you must configure Exchange Online alongside another solution, you don't want to use EOP, then we recommend that you place the solution behind Exchange Online. Okay, we've got a lot of guidance. Follow the best flow practices that we have. Simple diagram that shows you what's supported and what's not supported. Should be very easy to figure out. Do it that way, and you'll have a decent experience. Do it just pointing to Exchange Online, and you'll have the best experience. But do it the way we recommend, and you'll still be in a supported environment if you're not directly pointing to Exchange Online. All right. This is also very brand new. This came from a colleague of mine in support who normally works with high availability, but he wanted to stretch his wings and talk about an issue where migrating DLs from on-premises to the cloud can be a little troublesome based on the way they're managed. So there's two paradigms for managing DLs. You've got the centralized system where someone calls the help desk. The help desk then makes the change is reflected in the directory changes are then replicated throughout the environment. That's one way. Another way is the delegated administration, and that's the end user themselves going through their own Outlook client and making the DL changes through Outlook, and those changes, again, are committed against the directory and replicated throughout the environment. Pretty simple stuff. But the way in which they're done depends on the way in which you migrate DLs, rather, will depend on your administration model. So if you're in the centralized administration model, you're probably not going to run into any issues. If you're in the delegated model, though, once the DLs move from Exchange on premises to Exchange Online, you're going to break that user's ability to manage them, and I'll show you how to fix that in a minute. So the migration process starts by taking the DLs that you want to migrate and moving them to a dedicated OU that does not sync to Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory, AAD Connect, when you move those DLs from wherever they're located now into an OU that doesn't sync, AAD Connect will see that as a DL deletion. And so it'll start to remove those groups from Office 365 and Azure ID. The change will then propagate from the directory services used by Office 365 to the Exchange Online directory services, and once they propagated through there, those DLs are gone. The next thing that you do is you create a new replacement DL in Office 365. And all the DL settings you'll have extracted from the previous DLs that were moved, you will simply apply to the new groups that you create. And the entire process now is scripted. You're the first group of people to hear about this script. It's brand new. We just published it on the web. We've tested this with DLs of 10,000 members with a minimum of 10 members in each of the multi-valued attributes within the DL. That took just over 3 hours to migrate them all just with our test script. So that's a very short period to migrate those number of those DLs and those number of memberships. Thank you. And during the whole migration process, nothing is broken for the end user. The DLs are maintained on-prem during the whole time until the cutover process is done, and that at that point, everyone's using the new DLs. The move script is documented there. The notes section have all sorts of commandlets and things for you to run. Doesn't include the script itself. The script is out on GitHub for you to go ahead and download, but everything that you need to do outside the script to get ready is in there, along with details about what the script does in terms of extracting the settings from the DLs that you're cloning and moving and applying those to the DLs in Office 365. All right. I said it was going to be Office 365, so how many of you are running SharePoint on premises? All right, well, look out for this. This is a new bug. This just came up. I just discovered this myself, and I thought I should share this. It's a perfect audience for this kind of stuff. The September 2018 .NET Framework security update, that did resolve an important vulnerability, but the SharePoint out-of-box workflows now breaks after you apply it, and that's simply because some of the types that were previously used were now marked as required versus optional. So all you need to do is just go into the web.config files and add the necessary types. The notes section gives you the details. It actually has all the text. You can literally copy and paste it right from the notes into your web.config file, restart the services, and it'll fix that problem for you right away. All right, another common ask is around Exchange Online auto-archiving and having to move a large enough data that is larger than the storage cap we put on you. So an example is, okay, I've got an on-prem mailbox. It's 280 gigs in size. I've got 50 gig in the primary, 230 in the archive mailbox. What do I do? How do I move that? Because the auto-archive limits me to 100 gig. And I can't really pause in the middle of the migration to wait for it to auto-expand because the auto-expand process could take up to 30 days. So what's the solution? Well, we've got two options for you. One is if you're doing an MRS-based move, the hybrid move, you can raise an internal case with us. It is a support call, but you'll connect to the archive product engineering team. You'll give them the size of your primary and archive mailboxes. If you're not sure how to do that, here's a perfect script for you to use to do that. Get the size of the mailbox, give it to them, and they'll go ahead and make the adjustments for you. Option number two. If you're not doing the hybrid move and you're instead using the PST import tool, you're still going to be calling support, but you're not going to talk to the archive team. You're going to talk to the import service product engineering team, and they're going to make sure that you have all of those things done before they can do anything for you. You've got to have archive enabled. You've got to have auto archive enabled as well. Before you start the process of importing it, you still have to let them know the size of the PST files that are coming. And they're going to create auxiliary archives. These are not the same as normal archives, but it's going to look the same to your users. It's just a separate type of object that doesn't have the same storage cap on it that the normal archive mailbox does. So we're going to create those. We'll give you a CSV mapping that you can use to import them in. And then after that's imported in, the migration will be complete at that point. All right, another new thing that we added is attachment ownership. You can control whether recipients have unrestricted rights now to attachments that are sent through Office message encryption. How many of you are using Office message encryption today? All right, not too many. How many of you have the need to send encrypted mails? All right. How many of you are using a third-party solution to do that? That's a lot of hands. We have this stuff built in, people. You should try the stuff that you've already paid for. It's pretty good. Now, in this case, this is a tenant-wide setting for Exchange Online. The set IRM configuration with decrypt attachment for encryption only, that is a tenant-wide setting for all protected mails. It's not going to have any other effects on any other Azure information protection templates that you might be using. This is just an OME2 thing. So if you're using some of the built-in templates, like do not forward, an example, those are still going to behave as they would before. The OME team is also doing a survey. So especially for those of you who are using a third-party product around encrypted mail, I would strongly recommend you go and take this survey and answer a few questions and help us make a product that better suits your needs and get you using something that's native and built in instead of something bolted onto the side. All right, in-place hold and licenses. Here's one where a customer was trying to clean up some licenses. They mistakenly changed licenses for a user who had their data on in-place hold. Now, the user had an E3 license when they were put on hold, and the license was changed down to a P1 license, but not a P1 license with archive. As you may know, it's in the P level, it's got to be P1 plus archive or P2 to get the archive. To get in-place hold, rather. But what's important to note is switching these licenses is not going to do anything. Changing to a lower SKU, if you change to a lower SKU that doesn't have the feature available to it, you'll get a message like what I have in italics on the bottom. It's just going to error out saying the product that you're using doesn't support this, basically. You can also, if you try to remove the license, you'll get a separate one. So if you change it, you get one error. If you try to remove it, you get a separate error, but it's basically the same thing. It's telling you you can't do that either because the product doesn't support it or because the mailbox can't be disabled because it's on hold. All right, who's using modern public folders? Who's not using public folders at all? Haha, wow, okay. Who is using Yammer? Who's using groups? Okay. Who's still emailing attachments? Oh, everybody. Me too. Okay. Modern public folder deployments. This is another big one that we see all these things happening out in the field. So many misconfigurations, but again, part of this is our fault. There isn't a lot of documentation out there on best practices. So I'm going to tell you what the best practices are, and these were all derived from hours and hours of cases from support engineers and PFEs working with customers who had improper configurations or unexpected configurations where after working with them, we got them into a good state, but until they were in a good state, they were having a bad time. So use larger public folder mailboxes and don't make them dedicated. The old paradigm of the dedicated public folder database or dedicated public folder server, all that stuff was gone years ago. But still, some people are still trying to do that. We don't want you to do that. We want you to use large public folder mailboxes. 70 to 100 gigs, that's great. That's actually a small mailbox for Exchange. Make sure your primary public folder mailbox is empty and excluded from the servicing hierarchy. No one needs to touch that but the admin. Use dedicated content mailboxes as well. Make sure that they're excluded from serving the hierarchy. Hierarchy requests, they're going to be the more common requests. Those can go to other servers that don't have the data loads on them. Use dedicated public folder mailboxes to serve the hierarchy as well. And use as many public folder mailboxes as necessary to serve the hierarchy. It's okay to scale out. Distribute them throughout your user mailboxes. You want to make sure that they're in close proximity to where your users are. And don't use Conversation View for public folder favorites because performance will be terrible if you try to do that. So simply don't use that. Another common ask is, how do I handle accounts or data from former employees? And this could be an employee leaving for any reason. It could be voluntary, it could be involuntary, it could be sudden loss, it could be a whole variety of reasons. Now, the way in which you handle this process will somewhat depend on the situation. Obviously, if we're looking at a termination situation, you're going to want to get them out of the system faster rather than slower. If someone has just resigned or whatever, maybe there's not as much pressure to clean things up, but you still want to do that right away. The process, and we'll get a little bit deeper into this, the process, the amount of time it takes will also depend on the tools that you're using as well. So for instance, if you're using the Exchange Admin Center and Exchange PowerShell to terminate someone's mailbox session, that can happen right away. But other things that you might do, like resetting a password, that could have a delay of 30 minutes or so because of caching. If you use the Azure Admin Center, that could have a delay of 60 minutes because of caching that's done in Azure. And on premises, depending on what you're doing, that could take, depending on the setting that you're changing, that could take anywhere from 3 hours or more to take effect. All right, so how do you do it? Step 1, reset the password. And this should be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Don't send it to them. Okay, just reset the password. Initiate a OneDrive sign-out across all devices. How many of you knew you could do that? Awesome. How many of you did not know that? Okay, awesome. Here's how you do it. It's right in the Office 365, now Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You go in the Admin Center, you go down there to the OneDrive settings. Here you can see down there. And you can see where it says Initiate Sign-out. And in fact, I kind of went through it too fast. I thought I had a laser on here, but maybe not. If you look at the second last one, it says sign out, and there's a little sign out link that's next to it. Once I click that sign out link, notice how the text will change slightly. And now it says we've initiated the sign out for the user. It may take some time for the user to be signed out from all sessions on all devices. But this is basically cutting them out as quickly as you can from OneDrive. Now next, you want to grab the contents of their mailbox and either export it into a PST using Outlook or put it on hold before you delete the user account. You can also optionally forward their email addresses to other users if other people are picking up their workload and need to communicate the way they were. And then you want to wipe and block their mobile devices as well. All right. You also want to block their access to Office 365 and email. How do you do that? Also in the Admin Center. How many knew you could do that? All right, more of you. That's awesome. You can go right here, and you could say allow the user to log in, or you can click block and block the user from all access to Office 365 and all access to email as well. Then move their OneDrive content. It's not going to be their OneDrive anymore, so move it somewhere where it can be managed appropriately, not just by humans, but by any policies that you might be using to reason over that data as well. And then remove and delete their Office 365 license. How do you do that? Again, through the admin UI. Now, that's not the only way to do it. You could use PowerShell for some of these things, but it's just so much faster. It's one click for each of these actions, and you're doing them all on the same user object in the same admin portal. So since you're all on the same page, you might as well stay there and do it all at once in the right order. All right. And then at that point, once you've done that, the license is gone, and that user's account is gone, their data has been recovered, their email addresses have been repurposed, and they no longer have access to any of the production environment or any of the data that was held therein. All right. Now, in terms of taking control of their OneDrive content, you can actually click that Access Files there again in the admin UI. You go in there, you click Access Files, and then that will send you to their URL, where you now have permissions to the URL. It'll actually display a new URL for you. You'll click on that right in the Admin Center and go right to the OneDrive content. Last thing, delete their Office 365 account. Once that's gone from the recycle bin, it's gone completely. Go into the admin, portal, hit delete user. It's going to ask you, are you sure? And you say yes, and the user's gone. All right. How many of you have heard about the new license administrator role we just added? Ooh, only a couple of you. Okay. Well, this is pretty cool because now you have a dedicated role for managing licenses in Azure Active Directory. It's very recently released. We have scoped things down, so things like purchasing permissions and so forth. They're going to stay with the billing role, but this is just assigning or deassigning licenses. This is just a way to centralize that process away from some of the higher or more privileged administrative functions that we had in there. And this is important because, as you can see, it removes the ability for the accidental purchase of services, which we would not want. It's in the preview right now, but it's going to be leaving preview and coming into GA very shortly, but you can go and check it out today. It's in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. You can go in, go to the user profile, add the role for that user, make them a license administrator, and they can then go ahead and manage licenses for your organization. How many of you are using DLP? All right, how many of you are using DLP in Office 365 to catch credit card numbers? Ooh, a few of you, good. This is a fairly new one. You probably know DLP and our credit card sensitive information types have been around for years. In fact, the credit cards were one of the first sensitive information types we were able to do. It's based on a very simple algorithm, the Lund's algorithm, or sometimes called the Lund test. It's a very simple checksum, looks for the pattern of 14 digits. It does some simple math operations on them to determine whether or not it's a valid credit card. And that could be from all sorts of issuers, not just like Visa, MasterCard, or Amex, but also like JCB, which is a large credit card company in Tokyo, Japan, and so forth. And Discover Card, even though I don't think anybody uses Discover Card anymore. Do you? Who uses Discover? I didn't think so. Okay. What we found, though, is that the effectiveness of the policy depends on how much information it can glean from it and in what format that information exists. If we find simply the pattern of 14 or whatever characters that matches the Lund test and the checksum passages, which is what we use the Lund test for, then we know that's a fairly good match. If there's some keywords around it, for instance, like the word Visa, for example, then we've got a higher degree of certainty, an 85% degree of certainty that it's a credit card number. But here's something interesting. What one customer found is when they transformed their data, which had the credit card number and the CVV separated by initially a tab, they transformed it, and that caused it to be separated by a space instead of a tab. And once it was separated by a space, that broke pattern recognition. So the DLP engine could actually not detect that in that format. So for those of you first storing credit card in Office 365, credit card info in Office 365, I would remind you that only the commerce portion of Office 365, the part where you actually type in your credit card number, only that portion is PCI compliant. No other service in Office 365 is PCI compliant. SharePoint, Exchange, none of them, which means none of them have compliance for storing credit card numbers. Not that it matters in this case because PCI compliance says you can't store the CVV anyway. But the whole point is this customer storing them on premises, and they're legitimately storing them in files. And those files, as I said, were initially tab separated. Someone did some work on them, changed them to space separated, and that broke all of their DLP sensitive information type rules for credit cards. So keep that in mind. That's an interesting little nuance that just showed up. All right. I also always try to talk about this one, too, just as a frequent reminder. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but I do want to let you know, I know everyone's having a great mobile experience with stuff, but we still do, from time to time, have issues with third-party devices that are outside of our control. They'll cause problems with one of our services or products, but the fix is outside of our control, such as the Apple Mail app rendering messages with accented characters incorrectly. That's a solution only Apple can provide. You'll see that when you're using our services, unfortunately, but that's a solution only Apple can provide. And also with iOS devices, there are several known calendaring issues, and this particular topic gets updated fairly regularly as issues go, new issues arise, and so we'll keep recycling the same one document for you to go and have just one place to go in and see this stuff. All right, here's something also that's interesting. This is a historical support case coming to bite you in your second support case. This was something where the 2080 events, hopefully those of you who've been doing Exchange for a while know that the 2080 events are the topology discovery events. So here we're looking for all the servers that are in site, all the servers that are out site. If you hard code it, we look to the registry for that information. If not, we just do the discovery and we log events when we see them or when we don't see them. We had a customer that was seeing these events coming up every 90 seconds. Every 90 seconds. Who could tell me how frequently they should come up? 15, that's right. Whoever said 15. They should only come up every 15 minutes. These were coming up every 90 seconds. What do you think that was doing to performance on the server? It's tanking it. So what we did is we first did the Exchange trace, and we looked and we saw that the registry was changing. So every time the registry changes, we would go ahead and do the refresh, check the topology again. And the topology service, there's a watcher. It watches the registry information to see, have you hard-coded it, or am I looking for the same information at the proper interval? Now, the watcher, that will look every 30 seconds at the registry, and that's normal. That's a very lightweight operation, so even though it happens quite a bit, it's not a huge performance hit on the server. If there's a change, though, then it will wait 60 seconds and then trigger the discovery. Well, lo and behold, 30 plus 60 is 90. That's how frequently it was happening. We're getting close. So once a change is detected, we simply reload the registry, and then we compare the in-memory data. Is the in-memory list of servers we have, is that the same as what is in the registry? If not, we compare them. So when we compare them, we'll look for a config DC hostname. If it's not there, we'll return string.empty. Now, string.empty is not the same as null, okay? And that's what was going on here. When we compare string.empty to what we have in memory, which is null, we get a mismatch, and therefore we trigger topology discovery. So how did this instance 0 come to being in the first place? The customer said they didn't set it. But what we think have it is that through a prior support call, they did in fact hard code a directory server in there. But then they also went and then removed it by setting that to null. And what we found is that when you set it to null, it does not remove that instance 0 from the registry. And as a result of that, that is a difference between what we have in memory and what we're going to see. And that will always trigger that 90 seconds. So the fix was simple. Go into all the affected servers, remove instance 0 from the registry, problem solved. Maybe restart the topology discovery service, but that was it, problem solved. So it's really the commandlet that was leaving something behind when you changed the configuration. So you're going to want to watch for that. It's always important to have good baseline configuration from which to refer. All right, how many of you have heard of off scrub? Maybe not too many. But that's okay. That's just an internal name for a fix-it utility that, as its name might imply to you, scrubs Office from your computer, removes Office in a clean and unsupported way when you're having trouble doing it the normal way through a control panel or through the setup process. It used to be an easy fix tool. It still is, but we also have the ability to download it now. And in fact, it's evolved quite a bit. You can see down at the bottom, downloading that cab file. And when I open the cab file, it brings this up, gives me the option to uninstall completely, apply repairs automatically if I click advanced, and then I could click next and go through that. Now, this is a standalone uninstaller. We've actually expanded it into our full diagnostic suite. Now, those of you who were last year, you know I was talking about diagnostics, or configure.office.com rather. This was where we wanted to send you for all the different troubleshooters and wizards and everything that we have that can help you resolve problems with Outlook, with Exchange, with Hybrid, with Auto Discover, with Calendar, et cetera, et cetera. This has changed. It's no longer that. Now it's diagnostics.office.com, and it's the Support and Recovery Assistant, SARA, or SARA for short. SARA is the new tool. SARA is also this site that you're seeing here at the Outlook Support Center. SARA has a lot of information for you. Click on the download to download SARA. It's a .NET application. When you download it, it'll prompt you to install it. You click on install. If there's a newer version that you already have, each time you launch it, it will check for a newer version. If there is a newer one, you can say, okay, download it now, or you can skip it. It'll download. It will also continue to change as it's downloading the actual size of the download file. So now it says 10 megs out of 36.6, but later on it could say like 15 megs out of 64.4. So just let it download. It'll eventually get there. The first time you use it, you have to sign the license agreement, but it's a free tool. Sign the license agreement, and now it wants to know what apps are you having problems with. We can do Office, Outlook. We can even do Dynamics 365, OneDrive, Skype for Business. There's some advanced stuff that we'll look at in a minute. Outlook on the web, Outlook for Mac, mobile devices, etc. Very, very extensive coverage here. So the way it works is you choose what you're having trouble with. You can say whether or not you're working with Microsoft support personnel on this issue. If you check that box because you are, we're going to help you upload the logs that the support engineer is looking for. You select the problem that you're having with, and the problem could be a variety of things. We're looking at Office here. We want to install it or uninstall it, or I'm having an issue with my subscription. It won't install Visio, won't install Project, and so forth. Outlook won't start. Maybe Outlook is crashing. I can't access my calendar. Outlook keeps prompting for passwords. Or there's even a catch-all at the end for other problems as well. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I just want to show you the sheer breadth and depth of coverage that we have for all these issues that we can help you troubleshoot and resolve. Some of the advanced diagnostics. Maybe you want to collect advanced diagnostic information about Outlook. Maybe you want to collect advanced diagnostic information about Exchange Online. Maybe you're having an issue with one of the features, or maybe you're just having a basic connectivity issue. Again, you select the problem that you're having, you walk through it, and we'll walk you through the solution. Now, in a couple cases, the solutions require you to actually run SARA from the machine where the problem occurs. So like here's one. You're having a problem with shared mailboxes. It wants to check everything on the machine. So it's asking me, is this the affected machine? If it is, I'd say yes, and the wizard would proceed forward. If it's not, I say no, and I have to go to the machine and go to that URL and download the SARA tool on that machine and run it from there. Obviously, same thing with uninstalling Office. You're always going to be doing that from the machine where you want to uninstall it. But notice, though, between these two, it's sending you to a different link. So each one of these has a separate link it will take you to when it wants to run it in sort of a standalone mode on the affected machine. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What was that? What? Ninja Cat? Okay. Yay. Oh, hey, let's see. Gosh, what did I do with everything? No. Okay. This was not from me. This was a special thing from Greg Taylor, the director of marketing. This is a very cool and special. I will say this is 2XL. So hopefully if you do get it, you can find someone who can wear it. And this is going to go to the person who, without shouting, can, in an orderly manner, raise their hand, wait for me to acknowledge them so that they can answer this question. Hopefully all of you know because it just happened earlier this week. Okay, but you need to tell me at what exact time was Squeaky Lobster's birthday celebrated? Not when the ice cream social started or ended, but the exact time. I think your hand was up first. 2:15. You got it. I'm going to leave that here for you. Enjoy. Okay. Now, some webcam covers. Ooh. It's almost as good as a sweatshirt, right? No? Sorry. Okay. What size? These are 1. These are size 1. Okay. Who can tell me, and by the way, for those of you leaving, if you leave, you're going to miss an exclusive sneak preview of some cool software that's coming out. Who can tell me, I'm not kidding, that was not a cheap ploy. Who can tell me the name of the engineer responsible for Squeaky Lobster, the developer who started it all? Put your phones down. I see so many people like, I got this. Wow, I don't see, oh, nope, sorry, Greg, you're not eligible. Nope, sorry, Brent. No Microsofties. Huh, wow, okay, well, 1 for me. All right. Okay, gee, I really thought you'd get that. We did. It's in the blog. Yeah. All right. I'll give a simple one that all of you are going to know since we just talked about the blog. What is the official name of the Exchange blog? Don't shout it out. Orderly, right there. Bingo. Yeah, not as much clapping. It's not a sweatshirt. Sorry. All right. Thank you. All right, now there's no easy way to do this. I have tons of Ninja Cat stickers, but there's no real easy way to hand them out. No, I'm not Julia White. I'm not going to throw things into the audience. And instead, let's just see how many people are in this room. More people are in the room than I have stickers for, so this could be tough to hand out. So let's see. Raise your hand if this is your first time at Ignite. Damn, that's too many people. Huh. Okay. Raise your hand if you were born this month, September. Okay, that works. If you don't work for Microsoft and you were born in September, come up here. And choose some stickers, and then I'm going to keep going so that we don't run out of time. Please limit yourself to just 1 or 2. And there's a wide variety, so it's a lot more than what hands showed up. I might have to start checking IDs. Oh, gosh, it's the tape fiasco all over again. Okay. The last few minutes, last 10 minutes or so, I want to take some time. Yeah, all of you were born in September. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I actually was. Oh, wow. Okay, we're good here. We are good here. All right. The last bit, I'm going to hang out here because I want to me doing the demo stuff. The last bit, we are building a whole new dashboard. We call it Mailflow Insights, and it's. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. You're going to be the first people to see it. In fact, you're going to be seeing actual screens from the developer's box where I took them. I will say I do see a lot of you recording this, taking pictures. You could just sit, relax. The whole thing's being recorded. You can download it later. You'll have the whole slide deck. You can take pictures if you want, but you don't have to. So the Mailflow Insights dashboard, you're going to see it in a minute. It's super cool. We have outbound and inbound Mailflow, alerts, NDRs, queues. We're finally exposing the queues so you can get an idea of what your mail queues look like in the cloud. Thank you for that. And I would also point out, Sean here in the third row is the PM for this feature, who has very, very graciously allowed me to let you be the first people outside of Microsoft to see this stuff. Yes. And also, since we're all here, he's actually here to get your feedback too. So if you have any comments or feedback or anything, you can certainly send it to me and I'll get it to Sean. But he's right here, people. You could tell him everything you think about it right now. So let's get to it. So this is a version of what it could look like. Again, this is from the dev box. This is not the final version. This is what we're working from today. I'll point out a few things and then we'll go through them in a little bit of detail. We've got up at the top the mail flow map. The red line is your Office 365 tenants. On the left side, you're seeing a visual representation of mail flowing in. And on the right-hand side, you're seeing a visual representation of mail flowing out. So at a glance, for instance, you can see the mail flow coming in from the internet rivals almost all the mail coming in from all other places combined. Below that, outbound and inbound mail flow, you've got not just a visual indicator of the number of messages, but the percentage of those that were protected in transit by TLS. Hopefully, ideally, we want to get to 100% for everything, but that may not be possible depending on your configuration and your requirements. But having a very high level of TLS encrypted messages is very important. We also have recent alerts right on the dashboard. You can go right to the dashboard, see the alerts that are there for you. In this case, we've got some medium alerts, one about messages being queued, and one about an executive or a VIP individual's messages not flowing as fast as we'd like them to. Down below that, there's some non-delivery reports. Again, we're going to move through each of these individually in a bit, but I just want to familiarize you with the main dashboard. We've got mail flow status in the middle column, the exec's mail status, that's sort of that white glove VIP emails. How is it going? Looks like it's okay. We've got 7 that were delayed, 10 failed, but could be worse. The queue, looks like we've got a queue length here right now of 1,500. It's always great to know that, and you can hit refresh and get the queue length in real time after that. Below that, auto-forwarded messages. That could be a big deal for your organization. Ideally, unless you have a legitimate business need, you shouldn't be seeing auto-forwarded messages. That looks like someone's trying to leak data out of your organization, so you probably want to look into that and find out who is forwarding those messages and to whom. Also, some break-fix things over on the right. If we think that your mail flow rules are running slowly after our performance evaluation, we can give you some details as to how to fix that, maybe some guidance on that. If we detect an incorrect connector configured, we can go ahead and help you fix that. Or if we see things like a mail loop going between on-prem to the cloud and then back to on-prem again, we can help you resolve that through connector configurations. And if there's something wrong with your sender domain configuration, we can help you with that as well. So let's take a little bit closer look at some of these things. So messages protected in transit by TLS. So here all I've done is I've simply clicked on the outbound and inbound mail flow and chosen the TLS. And it's telling me the number of messages that are coming from Office 365 outbound protected by TLS and the number of messages coming into my tenant that are protected by TLS. It's pretty high values right there, over 90% for each of them being protected, which is good. And I could, if I wanted to, you could see up here, there's this little connector report. I can change that and look at a specific connector report if I wanted to as well. We also have documentation built in the portal, so if you're not sure about TLS or the proper order of the ciphers that we recommend, you can click Learn More about this and we'll take you right to the documentation on that. Now the connector report, this is what it looks like by default. Not a lot of activity going on in this particular test tenant. But I can change that from Mailflow, which is what it's showing now, to TLS usage. And now I can see, looking at this particular connector, the number of messages that are not using TLS, well, that's like 42% of them. That's a lot of unencrypted messages going over this particular connector. So that may be something, depending on how I'm using this connector and where it's going to, that may be something I may or may not need to look into. Ideally, again, you'll want to protect all of your messages with TLS, but there may be exceptions to that depending on what you're trying to do. The other thing is when we look at inbound, we can also tell you if an inbound connector is using, in this case, a lower version of TLS than we would like. We would want to very much deprecate TLS 1.0 and 1.1 and have it so that everyone's using 1.2. And here we've got an inbound partner connector that's seeing a lot of mail flow that's still using 1.0. In this case, that may be actually a scenario where you as the administrator reach out to your counterpart at that partner and get them to move to TLS 1.2 and start securing that communication. Now, viewing alerts. The alert dashboard, we give you a whole bunch of alerts in there ranging from low to medium to high. You can go ahead and filter them. You can export these alerts. Filtering allows you to filter based on status, based on policy, based on users. If you're doing some sort of investigation, you may choose to filter based on time range to look for any alerts that you might correlate with the activity you are investigating and so forth. And again, we've got the same one-click refresh for this too to keep things up to date. Looking at one of these alerts, here's one. Here's an unusual volume of delivered malware. This could indicate that your organization is actually under attack. Now, depending on the nature of the attack, it could be just a normal attack that's happening to everybody, or it could be your organization specifically under attack by malware. So either way, when you see a very high volume of malware, not just malware that is coming your way, but malware that gets delivered, you absolutely want to look into that immediately and also notify your end users through the button that you see at the top so that they can go and make sure that they're not clicking on the wrong messages as well. It's a lot easier to get phished than you think, a lot easier. In fact, I can't tell you the number of times where a Microsoft employee who works in email or who works in security will get fooled by a very crafty looking phishing message. So you got to be super, super careful. And of course, don't forget that there's the reporting capabilities that you have within Outlook to report this stuff to MSRC and other places so that we can all work together against it. We talked about your org's domain status as well and where the MX record is configured. We can give you information on that. We can also tell you if there's a problem. Here in this case, the problem is that the domain expired, and once that expired, that's of course going to cause problems with your DNS record. So here we tell you that go ahead and contact your domain registrar and see if you can go ahead and get that fixed. Message is queued. This is brand new information that we're exposing to you. Of course, it's very easy to get this value for on-premises, but when you are in the cloud, it can be a little bit nebulous as to how you get this. Well, we're giving it right to you, right in the dashboard, and we're giving it to you not just to show you that information, but so that you can act on it in case you have a larger than expected queue, or a misconfigured connector, or something like that. And in fact, if you can see, there's a couple solutions here. There's a fix it now that we can use to fix this issue where the connection is being refused. And there's a separate thing that we can do is go into the connector setup and fix this issue, which is the connection timing out for this one as well. Messages auto-forward outside your organization. Again, that could be an indication of data leakage. You want to look into that right away. If you're seeing things forwarded by mail flow rules, then maybe your administrators trying to exfiltrate some information for some reason. If you're seeing it by SMTP forwarding, that could also be an administrator trying to exfiltrate. If you're seeing it through inbox rules, that could be a user trying to exfiltrate data. But either way, having messages automatically forwarded out of your organization is generally not a good thing, although again, there may be instances where it's appropriate for your organization, but you'd still want to look into it to make sure that the ones being forwarded are the ones you intend to be forwarded. For SMTP authentication, we also give you a nice report on that. We can tell you also not just the authentication side of it, but also, again, how you're doing in terms of TLS 1.0 deprecation and moving forward to TLS 1.2. And then the fix-its that I talked about, for instance, the incorrect inbound connector, where here's something where it gives us information about it. It says we can go here to remove the connector and change it to a partner connector, which is what it should be, since it's going to .messagelab.com. And so we try to give you all the information in a one-click way to go exactly where you need to go to fix whatever problem that we've detected for you. All right, so that is the whole dashboard right there. The fix slow mail rules again, fix possible mail loop, and fix sender domain. Those are all there. I'm imagining Sean will probably add more stuff as we mature this as well. All right. All right, we got 9 seconds left. The only other thing I wanted to say is we've got a whole new Modern Workplace developer community, lots of forums for you to check out. Check those out. And then the last thing is quick, jump on this URL, everyone, because we're giving away actually more than 50 copies of these. So we've got almost 100 copies of these to get away. This is a unique URL. Go to that URL, and you can have just under 1,000 pages about Office 365 to read for free. Normally, I would go and switch to the survey slide after this, but I'm just going to say go to the portal and fill out your survey so that I can leave this link on here for everybody to catch it down. With that, thank you very much for staying to the last session of the last Ignite ever. No, just kidding. Just of this Ignite. Just of this Ignite. Hope you all have a safe flight home, and hope to see you next year. Thanks.